When Clark Miller's own daughter and son-in-law plotted to steal his home, they expected a frail old man too broken to fight back. What they didn't expect was a quiet storm of legal precision, community truth-telling, and a father who had nothing left to lose but his dignity. Clark Miller had always believed that family meant sacrifice. He spent his entire life building a home with his late wife Martha, nurturing his daughter Tiffany, and giving more than he could ever afford. Yet on that fateful Saturday when Tiffany shouted, "You will either serve my husband or get out of my house," the illusion shattered. Clark didn't argue. He didn't plead. He smiled, picked up his suitcase, and walked out of the house he had paid for with every ounce of his being. Tiffany and Harry expected him to crumble, to beg, but they underestimated the quiet resolve that had been simmering beneath his composed exterior. This time, things would be different. This time, they would feel the weight of their words. The events that unfolded a week later were not born of spite, but of meticulous planning. As Clark exited the house that day, his fingers curled around the familiar grooves of his keys, still warm from the ignition. He carried grocery bags that carved red welts into his palms, their weight symbolic of the burdens he had carried alone. The soft afternoon light filled the living room as he pushed open the door, only to find Harry lounging in Clark's cherished recliner, a beer dangling lazily from his fingers. The audacity was suffocating. Martha's last gift before cancer claimed her had been reduced to Harry's personal throne. "Grab me another beer while you're up," Harry muttered, not sparing Clark a glance. The remote rested arrogantly on his belly, as if he ruled this domain. Clark set the bags down with quiet deliberation, the sting in his palms a stark contrast to the numbness spreading through his chest. "Excuse me," he asked, voice steady. Harry didn't look up. Corona. Not that cheap stuff you drink. Clark had bought those Coronas specifically for Harry, draining his own limited funds for someone who couldn't offer the courtesy of basic respect. As Clark quietly reminded Harry that he had just walked in and needed to put the groceries away, Harry's indifference turned confrontational. He leveraged his physical presence, standing taller, using his bulk as an unspoken threat. The tension escalated when Tiffany entered, dish towel in hand, siding instantly with her husband, dismissing her father's dignity like an inconvenient detail. "Dad, just get him the beer." "It's not worth fighting over," Tiffany said, her disappointment as sharp as a blade. But Clark wasn't fighting over a beer. He was standing for the last fragment of his self-respect. When Harry tried to dictate terms, contribute or get out, Clark made his choice. "I'll pack," he said. The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany's expression faltered. Harry's smirk evaporated. Clark moved with a calm they had never seen before, retrieving his suitcase from the closet shelf, its leather worn from years of memories. He packed deliberately, bypassing sentiment for necessity, though Martha's photo found its place wrapped carefully in tissue. As he wheeled his suitcase down the hall, the urgency in their whispers confirmed their shock. They hadn't anticipated a man with nothing left to lose. Driving away in his old Buick, Clark passed the familiar streets of Kalispell, memories intertwining with betrayals. Tuition fees, wedding expenses, house payments. Each financial commitment had been framed as love, yet now felt like chains. The Pine Lodge Motel, a modest establishment on the town's edge, became his sanctuary. Clark's transition from a humiliated father to a man in control began with paperwork. Years in banking had armed him with knowledge most people overlooked. Mortgage payments were the first to go. Car insurance followed. Credit cards, life insurance beneficiaries. Every account that tethered him to their selfish demands was severed with precision. With every call, a burden was lifted. The silence from Tiffany and Harry was short-lived. As the week progressed, missed calls accumulated. Tiffany's initial confusion evolved into panic as foreclosure threats loomed. Harry's arrogance morphed into rage, then desperation. Clark listened to their frantic voicemails with an emotionless detachment. They had made their choice. Now they would live with it. When they finally showed up at Pine Lodge, desperation etched into their faces, Clark faced them with unshakable calm. Tiffany's tearful pleas fell on deaf ears. Harry's threats were dismissed with the authority of a man who had finally recognized his own worth. Clark reminded them of their ultimatum, echoed their own words back at them, stripping them of any defense. They had turned their backs on him. Now he was simply respecting their wishes. But Clark's revelation at the diner with Bob Harrison changed everything. The attempt by Harry to forge documents and secure a fraudulent home equity loan exposed a level of deceit Clark hadn't anticipated. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment power play. This was calculated theft. Fueled by this betrayal, Clark's mission evolved from personal liberation to a quest for justice. Bob's casual revelation about Harry's gambling debts at Glacier Peak's casino added layers to the narrative. Harry hadn't just disrespected Clark. He had plotted to rob him. The fraudulent loan attempt was not a mistake. It was premeditated financial assault. The implications were staggering. Clark's quiet retaliation now demanded a broader stage. Armed with evidence, Clark marched into Flathead County Courthouse. Filing eviction notices, revoking financial ties, and laying the groundwork for legal proceedings, he transformed from a passive victim to an architect of his own redemption. The clerk, though wary of the family dynamic, processed the documents, recognizing the clarity and legality of Clark's actions. But Clark knew this was just the beginning. Harry's schemes ran deeper, and Tiffany's complicity, whether through ignorance or willful blindness, was inexcusable. What began as an act of self-preservation was now a battle for dignity, justice, and retribution. As Clark left the courthouse, the weight of his decisions didn't feel like a burden. It felt liberating. The road ahead promised confrontations, legal challenges, and emotional reckonings. Yet, for the first time in years, Clark Miller felt alive. The man who once shouldered his family's dreams was now reclaiming his own. And this was only the beginning. Clark Miller's battle against betrayal had just begun. Filing the eviction notice at the courthouse was a decisive move. The clerk, seasoned by years of processing disputes, handled his paperwork with methodical precision. A 30-day notice period would be followed by the sheriff's involvement if contested. Clark left with his copies, feeling an unfamiliar sense of control. His next destination was the police station. Detective Jim Morrison, buried behind cluttered files and coffee-stained reports, greeted him with a firm handshake. Clark laid out the situation, the ultimatum, Harry's forged loan attempt, and the mounting financial abuse. Jim's expression darkened as he jotted down notes. Harry's a known regular at Glacier Peak's casino. Jim revealed, his debts are escalating, 18 to 20,000 at least. He's juggling creditors, some of whom won't hesitate to get rough. The truth was sobering. Harry's increasing aggression wasn't just entitlement. It was the desperation of a man teetering on the brink of financial ruin. Clark updated his evidence file that evening, adding Jim's insights to the growing collection of betrayal. By morning, Clark began proactively contacting Harry's creditors. His message was concise. Harry Thompson no longer resided at his address and had no claim to his property. He wasn't shielding Harry from consequences, but ensuring those consequences found the right target. In a town like Kalispell, news traveled at lightning speed. Mrs. Henderson cornered him at the post office, fishing for confirmation about family rumors. Clark, ever tactful, confirmed he'd moved out because adult children sometimes needed to face responsibilities. She nodded, her curiosity piqued. The information would spread like wildfire. At Miller's Hardware, Clark's former colleagues reacted with collective disbelief. Harry's narrative of being a benevolent provider unraveled as they learned of Clark's silent financial sacrifices. By the time Clark left, the truth had ignited conversations that would sweep through Kalispell by sundown. Pastor Williams at St. Mark's Lutheran Church offered genuine concern. Clark shared his decision to step away from an abusive dynamic, and the pastor acknowledged the painful necessity of allowing loved ones to face their consequences. The community's tide was turning. Conversations in Annie's coffee shop buzzed with the real story. Clark's patience allowed the truth to gain momentum organically. His phone rang again. Mrs. Patterson, his longtime neighbor, reported increased shouting at his house and police presence. The consequences were manifesting. Harry, however, wasn't done. He began a counteroffensive, spinning tales of elder abuse and Clark's alleged mental decline. Clark learned of these slanders through town contacts. Harry's desperation was palpable, his fabrications growing increasingly reckless. Detective Morrison informed Clark that Harry had attempted to file an elder abuse complaint, a flimsy strategy lacking evidence. Tiffany, meanwhile, tried emotional manipulation, calling Clark in tears, claiming pregnancy complications. Clark, wary but cautious, offered to cover medical expenses directly through Dr. Richards, exposing Tiffany's bluff. Harry escalated further, launching a public tirade at the First National Bank. Clark confronted him calmly, exposing his gambling debts in front of crowd. The confrontation shattered Harry's narrative, as murmurs of truth rippled through the gathering. The situation intensified when Pine Lodge's night manager, Steve Brennan, reported Harry loitering outside Clark's motel room. Security footage captured his threatening behavior, providing crucial evidence for the restraining order Clark would file the next morning. Detective Morrison fast-tracked the restraining order. Harry Thompson was now legally barred from approaching Clark or his property. Additionally, Morrison revealed Harry's attempt to leverage adverse possession laws, a long-term scheme to steal Clark's home through squatters' rights. Fortunately, Harry's plan lacked legal standing, but it highlighted his premeditated malice. Clark spent the day dismantling Harry's web of deception. He contacted creditors, corrected false addresses, and ensured Harry's financial predators knew precisely where to find him. Calls to Marcus Webb at Frontier Financial and Continental Credit Recovery corrected the narrative with clinical precision. The restraining order was finalized by the afternoon. As the sheriff prepared to serve Harry the papers, Clark received a defiant text. "This isn't over, old man." He forwarded the message to Morrison, knowing it only strengthened his legal position. Mike Brennan from Mountain View Auto, Harry's employer, called seeking clarity. Harry had been spreading stories about Clark's supposed mental breakdown and family emergencies. Clark clarified the situation, providing calm, factual corrections. Mike, a man who valued integrity, assured Clark that Harry's days at the dealership were numbered. The walls were closing in on Harry. The more lies he spun, the faster the truth unraveled them. Clark, with the weight of the law and community support behind him, prepared for the next phase of his plan. This battle wasn't just about reclaiming his home. It was about reclaiming his dignity and ensuring his daughter saw the cost of betrayal. By the following week, Clark Miller's quiet war for justice had shifted from defense to offense. The sheriff served Harry Thompson the restraining order, delivering it directly to Mountain View Auto's lot. The moment was witnessed by several of Harry's co-workers, the final blow to his crumbling reputation. Word spread fast in Kalispell. By noon, Harry's bravado had turned into public humiliation, but Clark wasn't finished. He scheduled a formal consultation with his attorney, Rachel Porter, a sharp-minded woman known for her meticulous approach to property disputes. "We'll secure a lien release for your property and draft a cease and desist letter regarding any further attempts by Harry or Tiffany to interfere with your assets," she assured him. Clark left her office with a clear legal strategy in place, fortified by documentation that would withstand any courtroom scrutiny. Meanwhile, Harry's lies continued to unravel. Clark's creditors' calls had a ripple effect. Frontier Financial froze Harry's accounts. Continental Credit Recovery issued a demand notice to Harry's workplace. Every avenue Harry had once exploited was now a dead end. Tiffany, still clinging to emotional manipulation, called Clark again. This time, her tone shifted from pleading to accusatory. "You're ruining our lives, Dad. Do you even care about your future grandchild?" "I care enough to ensure they're raised in a household that understands responsibility and honesty," Clark replied. "This path you're on ends in courtrooms and collection agencies, Tiffany." The conversation ended with Tiffany's silence. That weekend, Pastor Williams invited Clark to address the congregation. "Clark, people need to hear your side from you." Clark agreed, standing at the front of St. Mark's. He spoke plainly about his decision to step away from financial abuse. Love doesn't mean enabling dishonesty. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let people face the consequences they've earned. The church fell into a solemn hush, the weight of his words settling over them. The community response was swift. Offers of support came from unexpected places. Mrs. Patterson brought over home-cooked meals to Clark's motel. Tom from Miller's Hardware offered him a part-time position to keep busy. The isolation Harry had hoped to impose was failing. Instead, Clark's circle of allies was expanding, but Harry's desperation took a darker turn. On Monday morning, Detective Morrison called with an update. Harry attempted to file a false police report claiming you assaulted him at the bank confrontation. We have security footage that proves otherwise, but he's escalating. Be cautious. Clark's response was measured. He gathered affidavits from witnesses present at the bank, reinforcing his legal shield. The restraining order was now backed by tangible evidence of Harry's ongoing harassment. The final confrontation came sooner than expected. On Wednesday afternoon, Clark received a call from Mike Brennan. Harry's been terminated. He caused a scene this morning, shouting, throwing paperwork. We had to call security. Later that day, as Clark returned to Pine Lodge, he found Harry waiting in the parking lot. But this time, the sheriff's deputy wasn't far behind. Within minutes, Harry was handcuffed for violating the restraining order, his final act of defiance collapsing into legal consequence. Clark watched silently as Harry was driven away, not with a sense of victory, but with a quiet resolve. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring balance. His home, his dignity, and his peace were no longer bargaining chips in Harry's reckless game. Back in his motel room, Clark updated his evidence file one last time. The battle was over. Tiffany had not called again. The silence, though painful, was necessary. Sometimes, the hardest battles were the ones fought out of love, with boundaries drawn firm. As he sipped his coffee, Clark allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. He had reclaimed more than just a house. He had reclaimed his place in a community that now saw the full truth. The storm Harry unleashed had indeed consumed him, but Clark stood unbroken on the other side. The final week tested Clark Miller's resilience like never before. With Harry in custody for violating the restraining order, legal proceedings advanced rapidly. Rachel Porter, ever diligent, filed motions that ensured Harry's actions were documented in a manner no judge could overlook. The cease and desist letter was delivered to Tiffany, leaving no ambiguity about the consequences of further interference. Tiffany, cornered by the collapsing lies, sent a final text message. It wasn't an apology, but a terse statement. We're done. For Clark, that silence was bittersweet. He had hoped for reflection, perhaps even redemption. But sometimes, dignity requires accepting when others aren't ready to change. The following Monday, Clark met with Pastor Williams once more. You've done what you needed to do, Clark. Now it's time to rebuild. The words resonated. The community had seen through Harry's deception, but Clark's own healing had just begun. That week, Miller's Hardware offered him a full-time consultancy role. You've got the wisdom we need, Clark, Tom said, clapping him on the back. The offer wasn't just a job. It was a bridge back to normalcy. A few days later, Rachel Porter called with finality in her tone. The line releases are recorded. Your property title is clear. Legally, Harry and Tiffany are out of your life. Clark listened in silence, the weight of months of tension lifting slowly. Instead of returning immediately to his house, Clark made a deliberate choice. He organized a small gathering at St. Mark's Church, a thank-you luncheon for those who had stood by him. Over coffee and homemade pies, he reconnected with his community, not as a victim, but as a man who had weathered a storm with integrity. His homecoming was quiet. Alone, he walked through familiar rooms of his house, each corner holding memories of family and laughter. The betrayal had scarred those memories, but not erased them. He stood in the kitchen, watching the sunset filter through the window, a symbolic reclaiming of the life he had built. As days turned into weeks, the chaos subsided. Harry faced criminal charges for harassment and fraud. Tiffany, estranged and burdened with debts, moved out of Kalispell. Clark never wished them harm, only accountability. One evening, while tending to his garden, Mrs. Patterson visited. It's good to see you back where you belong, Clark. It feels good to be back, he replied, planting new roots both in the soil and in his life. In the end, Clark's battle wasn't won through aggression, but through steadfast patience, meticulous preparation, and a quiet strength of man who refused to be defined by betrayal. His story became a quiet legend in Kalispell, not of revenge, but of dignity reclaimed.